Well, my name is Yvonne Goodier, my maiden name Charles. Born in Silver City, New Mexico, a little mining town, southwestern New Mexico. I now live in Littleton, Colorado.
And how and why were you in the Philippines?
Well, my father was a mining engineer, and during the shortly after he was out of school, he went down to New Mexico, and times were, this was back in the 20s, late 20s, or early 20s then. He worked several mines and actually had something connected with his father's investments, I think, or interests. We did spend some time in South America after New Mexico, but coming back here and living in a small mining town in Colorado just was not working out financially, and it was during the Depression years. So he accepted an opportunity to go out to the Philippines. This was in 32, 33, I think. And so we went out in 1933, and were there until after the war.
How old were you when you were in the Philippines, and were you aware that there was a war looming?
Oh, definitely.
You know, just speak in full sentences as if the question wasn't going to be used.
Oh, I see. Yes, we were in the Philippines. Let's see, we went out, in, as I say, in 1933, and about 1940, I suppose, I believe that we realized, I wasn't quite as aware of it, but hearing my parents talk, we knew that there was going to be an incident with the Japanese. And my father had been in the First World War as a Navy man, sailor, and because of this, he was automatically in the reserves and was called back into active duty about 1940, or a year and a half, I guess, before the war broke out. So he, at that time, he had developed his own business. He was a consultant, geology consultant, and had an established office in Manila, but he also had to report to Cavite, the naval base, daily. So he actually kept two businesses going. And so this was, of course, we were quite sure that something was going to be developing, but we had this, I believe, optimistic view that if Japan really was interested in carrying on a situation which was not very comfortable, that we would certainly be able to control it. We had corregidor, we had all means of preventing them to coming in and doing anything that was really going to be threatening to us. However, we were told by the Navy, I believe, we were asked, the Navy had wanted all the Navy families to go back to the United States for security reasons. And my mother and father, after some discussion, decided that no, they would prefer to stay. The family, of course, he would have had to stay. So we remained by choice in the Philippines, and still optimistic that we would be somewhat secure.
So what age were you when the internment began? What kind of school were you in? What kind of neighborhood did you live in?
When the war broke out and we were interned, I was 15. I was going to Boardner School, and let's see, what was the, I'm sorry.
No problem. Okay, so anytime. So tell me about what kind of neighborhood were you living in, your friends, what were you doing, what was your school life like?
We lived in an area called San Juan, which was about 7 kilometers or miles from the heart of Manila. I was going to Boardner School, which required us to go to school 7 to, I believe, 12 or some early hour. And then after noon, we departed, came back home, partly because of the heat. Many people took siestas. I don't believe people my age, I never remember taking a siesta. And we had really a great life. I was a little disappointed sometimes because I was back out isolated from my friends in school, and whereas if they were down towards in the school area in the center part of town, they would be able to have after-school activities. Mine were generally back at where we lived. If I occasionally could get in for meetings like Girl Scouts, and I had ballet lessons and the usual thing that young people do. We had I would say, an ideal life, though it was comfortable. We were certainly happy. We kept busy. There was many places to scout around where we lived. We were in an old a compound that had originally been built as a Spanish convent for nurses back in when the Spanish had come out in the 1600s. A man had decided he bought the property, I guess, at one point. Maybe he inherited it from his father, and decided to develop it into 4 different compounds. It was a compound with 4 different houses, and we bought one of them, I think, about 3 or 4 years before the war, and it was an ideal place to live. We had a large front yard and a big banyan tree that we could climb. We had a tree house, and we would spend a lot of hours in it, and we would sometimes take the leaves and make a cut, or we'd make a cut in the bark, and we'd take the leaf and spread the sap from the bark and let it dry on a leaf, and make wonderful rubber balls. So.
Now, did your brothers and sisters talk to me about your family?
Well, I have a brother that's about 2.5 years older and a sister that's 7 years younger. So, needless to say, I didn't have too much in common with my sister, although we did share a room. And I believe we teased her quite a bit, which wasn't very nice. She claims things that we don't remember. And my brother we got along, but not always. But I did have a cousin that lived part of the time close by, and we were the same age, so we really related, I think, better. There was also a friend, Terry Myers Johnson, who has been very responsible, has been very involved with our reunions, that lived bicycling distance from us for a while, and we got together after school several times, quite often.
Were you in a co-ed public school?
We went to.
Go ahead, start again. We went to.
Oh, yeah. We went to Bordner School, which was a public school, and of course, boys and girls together, mixed nationalities, many nationalities. It was really quite an education, and had wonderful teachers. I think our education was probably superior to many, even though we didn't have a lot of school activities going on.
So internment, how did you find out Pearl Harbor happened, and how did you find out you had to be interned?
We were at school on the morning of was it the 8th, I guess, for us, and about noon, or a little before, we got word that there had been a bombing at Clark Field, which was interesting because we had just visited the area before that evening, or that day before. My parents had known some of the men, actually their parents, from New Mexico. They had brought this large group from the New Mexico area, many from Albuquerque, some from Silver City, and they went there to look up these young men, a few of them whose parents they had known. So we had a visit with them. Got home late, as I recall, and then had to get up for school the next day. We heard about Pearl Harbor, about a bombing, I think, at Clark Field. We didn't know about Pearl Harbor at that time. And so they dismissed school early, and we went home. And that was, of course, the end of school, because at that point, when we got home, I know we looked up and there was a dogfight going on. And I believe bits of the fighting, or the shells, were trickling down into the yard, so we finally did decide we better go in. So this was the beginning of the start of the war.
What did your parents tell you?
I don't remember. I think it was just obvious that we were involved with a war. It wasn't panic. It was just sort of, well, yes, it's finally happened, but we really didn't. I don't know that we were really ever expecting it or were ready for it. We weren't particularly. I don't remember being afraid. I remember thinking, yes, we have to be cautious. But it was interesting. It just came on. It was sudden, and yet it was gradual in a way too. My father, of course, I think was in Cavite at the time where he was working, and it was he was in a very precarious situation because Cavite was bombed heavily. He was, I think, several times it was questionable whether he would get through and get out. But they made preparations to get food. He was able to get boxes of canned goods and bring them to the house, store them. I think they felt that it was important to make some sort of a plan in case supplies would be cut off. My parents, of course, were very aware that the situation was serious. We did, but being a teenager, I think you felt, oh, this may blow over. And we had corregidor. The Japanese really couldn't invade the Philippines. It was going to be just a matter of time, and we'd be in control again.
Now, how much were you aware of the Japanese community in Manila? Did you have stores and businesses and Japanese
Oh,
people?
well, I don't really remember ever knowing any Japanese people. We bought Japanese goods because they had a lot of goods. We always felt maybe they weren't of the highest quality. They were cheap sometimes, but the Japanese people kept to themselves. And there were no Japanese in our schools, I don't think ever. It was an isolated, I believe they stayed in an isolated community. We had Chinese, interesting, but not Japanese.
And so when this war began, what did you know in terms of being interned? How did you find out you were going to be interned?
Oh, when we, let's see, they came to the door. I don't know whether we had word that some people were being picked up. I think the word had gotten around. We would see these trucks going back and forth in front of our house on the road. And, but I know when they came, they said, just prepare, get yourself enough things to last for 3 days. And this, I'd have to refer to my diaries to see how much notice we had. But the city had been declared an open city. The Japanese were in control, so I believe, expected something like this to happen. But we felt, well, they were going to have us register. 3 days, we'd be gone from the house. Probably we'd be coming back at that point.
Where was your father during that time, those 3 days?
My father, when they realized when the Japanese were taking control, he, of course, Cavite was just at that point, I think, bombed out. I think he left. He didn't try to, of course, get back, couldn't get back. And he decided that he wanted to, if anything was going to go on, he wanted to be with the family. He got rid of his Navy material, his uniforms. They took time to dig some holes, bury some jewelry that they thought they wanted to keep. There was, I guess, gasoline, some barrels of gasoline, which I wasn't aware of. I heard about this later, that they buried in the yard. Also took our sterling we had and secured it in the house between the walls. Also some scotch, which they didn't want to share with the Japanese, and tied this, and so it was hung in between at some point where they could reach in between the walls. And but he from all indication, he wanted to be known as a civilian.
Now, did you have house servants or help at that time?
We had some wonderful servants, yes, and was actually our chauffeur that was the most reliable. I believe some of the others probably had to leave. We had a gardener. I remember a gardener coming in, and they had pilfered some of the goods. he came in one morning, this was a few days before we were taken in, and had this beautiful Japanese kimono. Where he'd gotten it, I don't know. Asked if I'd like to buy it for 7 pesos, and I said, "Oh, isn't that beautiful?" And he was, so I think, as I recall, I paid him 7 pesos, and I put it away. I do have that, amazingly, still. And but this gardener was Gabino, was just an outstanding person, and he's the one that stayed at our house and somehow was able to keep communicating with us later, bringing in some food. Well, as long as we had some stored food that could be used and shared, we also shared it with them, of course.
So when did you find out that was the day you packed up for the 3 days? Did a truck come to round you up with other people, or do you remember the roundup?
I believe it was just a truck. It wasn't anything fancy. It was not a limousine, certainly. And no, we packed up, and as I say, enough for 3 days, and just basic clothes. So what we could carry, and not big suitcases. It was just they did not want us to bring in large amounts of goods.
So what was your first impression when you got to this place?
Our first impression was, to me, it was just confusion, complete confusion. What do you do? I think we were told we were given a space. I think bedding. We didn't have bedding with us. Somehow we shifted and were able to get a place to where we stayed. I don't recall. I'd have to, some of this is a little fuzzy right now, but I do have good records in my diary, and I haven't read them for a while. But they did separate us, and I believe that was quite early. We were placed, though, in an area called the Annex, where they wanted women with younger children and the babies, and because my sister, being young, about 7, we were placed in this annex area. And my father became a monitor, was able to secure a job. We all had to have camp duties. He was able to become a monitor down there, and that was to keep an eye on protective way and a way to help out.
Yeah, I just want to, every time you move your hand. Okay, so here you are, and you're, so you've started a diary you refer to. When did you start the diary, and why did you have a diary?
I don't know whether it was just, I think several of us did, and I had not kept one, I had a few diaries before the war, but very short ones, never continuous. I started it probably not immediately, but when we realized, yes, we were going to be here for a little while, and I think several of us thought it was a good idea. Margie Whitaker, Squires, Liz Lotzenheiser. So I think I started it maybe a week or 2 after, or maybe even sooner. I've got it dated, and I believe I have it dated from the beginning.
So you got to Santo Tomas and you saw people you knew. Tell me about, other than confusion, did you see friends? I mean,
Yes.
Did you know who's going to be there? So tell me about that arrival.
Well, it was interesting because, yes, here were our friends that we had known in school, plus many other people, because there were everyone that had any kind of American ties, British ties, whatever, were brought in. And I thought this was pretty nice. These were people that I only got to see during school time. And here we were in this camp, this area, and we could get together any time of the day. We did have curfew, I think, starting very early, 8 o'clock. Well, very early for the annex. And that was disturbing because I was with younger children, and so that cramped my style a little bit. But no, it was really sort of great in a way to be able to see these friends, and we were getting along pretty well. We had somehow some food was organized, not too soon. I think we relied on food being brought in, but I don't remember it being. It was stressful in a way, but no, we adapted. I think at our age, we somehow got through. It was.
So how did you and your friends spend your time initially?
I believe we just, there was lots of chit-chat about what was going on, and because this was certainly a different situation than we'd been accustomed to. We weren't in school. Wasn't this a break, a vacation? And then some word came that, oh yes, school was going to they were going to try to organize schools. When they finally realized, yes, we better make some plans, keep these kids busy. Also, fairly early on, I believe the word came out. Of course, things evolved gradually, organizing a central committee so that there could be some rules and regulations. This became very necessary for many reasons, sanitation primarily, and just to have people know that there were rules, and the Japanese had their regulations that we had to, of course, abide by first.
So as young teenage girls, friends that you were there, was there any interest in boys at that point in dating? I mean, if you had a lot of time on your hands and maybe closer quarters than normal, talk about your social life.
Yes, we were certainly aware of the boys. I don't think any of us were into dating. Girls out in the Philippines were maybe a little behind the teenagers. We were very similar to teenagers here in the States, but I think maybe a little more protected. And we'd had dates. Like I had a date with a friend, and we went to a Boy Scout gathering, and we had some parties, teenage parties, but not too many of us were dating on a personal level. Yes, we socially really were having a pretty good time because we organized sports quite early, or managed to do something to keep busy. I don't remember being bored. We weren't just sitting around. And as I say, school was started quite early. They organized sessions outside. We were able to set up somebody we found, I guess, school boards and a few chairs, or sat on the lawn. And it was not required. School was never required. So it was optional. If you did not want to attend school, you did not have to. Most of us did, actually. We thought it was probably a pretty good idea.
And how about the classes? What classes were good for you there, and how did you deal with it? Probably weren't a lot of supplies. How'd you make do?
Well, the classes, one of the things we found out very early is we did not have note paper. We did not have the books, our textbooks. We had some of the same teachers, not all. And because some of the teachers we'd had were not available, many people that were just business people during the war decided that they could be school teachers. My father was a teacher, became a teacher. I have an aunt that was interned. We had family, an aunt that was interned, and I have a cousin, his family were also interned. So I have an aunt that had been a school teacher who very early took over. And we had some marvelous teachers. A lot of them were just, as I say, business people.
So what subject did your father teach, and what age level, and how did he decide what he was going to tell people? Yes, I want to be a teacher now.
What did my father teach? I believe he taught math. He being an engineer. I never had him as a teacher, but I know he was very well liked by his students, because I think we had some letters. I think I have a few of those little notes saying how much they enjoyed Mr. Goodyear. And my aunt had been a teacher, and she also got involved with some plays, those productions that we started putting on pretty early on in the camp.
And your mother?
And my mother had been trained as a nurse, had not worked as a nurse because she got married and had a family. And but she did volunteer. She didn't go into nursing so much, but I think she assisted. She actually assisted in a medical way, but not as a nurse. And
what about you? Did you have any camp job?
Oh, anyone over 15 was required to have a camp job. And I did a variety of things. I don't recall the order right now, but gardening was one, serving on the lines, working at the hospital kitchen, cleaning up pots and pans. Let's see, I don't know what all. I did some babysitting on the side. I think that I could get paid a little for when people still had some money. So it was kept us busy, that along with school.
And what about your little sister who was 7? How did she spend her time?
My sister was course, she was in school too. I think she had more free time. She spent more time with my mother. I suppose my mother, because of her age, had to be available for my sister. And I don't recall that she ever said she was bored. She had friends. I think probably they had planned activities. Really, as far as the family, we didn't see as much of our family as we did pre-war. We got together for meals, and sometimes even meals, not entirely. But I believe mealtime was the main time we got together. And other times I was with my friends pretty much.
Now, as things started to change, when did you know that there was going to be a change in your life? So you were having a pretty good time going to school, being with your friends, doing.
Now, just a minute. When you're talking about during the war, when?
Well, when the change in the camp.
Okay, the changes took place gradually, and of course our philosophy or our thinking there was, because rumors were rampant, we would be out within, we would set the time. In the early days it was a matter of days, and as we were there a little longer, it became more, talked a matter of weeks, that we might be there maybe for 3 or 4 more weeks, and then I think we extended it maybe to a month, hardly ever more than several months or a couple of months. And propaganda that would come in from the Japanese could be depressing, but we generally realized it was propaganda. But
what form did it take?
There was, I believe, did we have bulletins? We had written material. We had a newspaper, but we had a little camp newspaper. Now, how did we get? A lot of it was verbal. We would hear verbally, but I believe they had a communication. I'd have to look in my diaries on this, but they were very anxious to let us know that they were doing very well with the war situation, winning, and they at least sunk our Navy at least 3 or 4 times. I mean, this was, and we would, realize that, of course, all this was exaggerated, but it was depressing too, to know that, because there was no signs that the Americans were around. Early days, there was no signs. We had planes later, but early on, we had no indication that the Americans were going to be there right away.
Now, what about the rules and how the Japanese soldiers in the camp treated you? Were you all afraid of them? Did you see anything bad happen?
We had very strict rules. We had roll call. Sometimes we had roll calls several times a day. Usually it was set up for morning and evening. And if everybody was accounted for, they would get through within a fairly short time. As they would stand out, we were required to be in front of our rooms. As the commandant came by, we would bow. We were told, had a specific way of bowing, a polite way. And the problem was, if there was anyone unaccounted for, we had to stay until that was taken care of. This, as I say, went on twice a day. But the Japanese never really, this is one of the questions when people know that we've been interned. Oh, were you mistreated? And I would say, no, we weren't mistreated directly by the Japanese. There was no physical contact. As long as you obeyed the rules, you were fairly safe. There was an instance when I was doing gardening, and times were at the point where we did not have anything to cook with, oils, and we were getting quite short of food, but occasionally we could get a banana leaf, and a banana leaf is very good lubrication. You put that in a pan and put a few vegetable scraps or whatever you might be able to cook, and you've got your lubrication. Well, I had this banana leaf. I was leaving the garden, and I noticed a Japanese soldier coming by, and we would do anything to avoid bowing when we didn't have to bow. So I tried to avoid him, and he was aware that I was doing this, so he beckoned for me to come over, and so I bowed, had the banana leaf in my hand, bowed very quickly, took off. It was not acceptable. He indicated he wanted that banana leaf down. You bow with your hands at your side and very properly. So, but it was a little intimidating. I thought, uh-oh, if I don't do it right, what's going to happen?
What about when you didn't have many clothes? What were you wearing?
Well, I think we could not be too clothes conscious in those days. We, I think it was first year we weren't too bad. The ones that lived in Manila. I think people that did not, had been brought in by ships and were caught there, had more trouble because they had just probably what they brought into camp. I believe we were able to get some of our clothes from camp, our Gabino, and was able to get things that were still there. But later, where we did actually wear out our clothes, we had an issue of clothes that came in through the Red Cross, I guess, and we all of a sudden all looked like we were in uniform. The girls had a choice of pink or blue, I believe, sort of a little short and shirt outfit. And I don't know what the men got, probably just shirts. But we were looking rather shabby towards the end. Our shoes were a problem. We did have some shoes issued, but and I guess they fit. But we got by a lot with what we called bakyas, the native shoe. And when a strap would break, we'd somehow fix it, and we could walk very well in bakyas. But no, if we had sports, I think shoes. Some people ended up with tennis shoes at the end. I ended up with just bakyas. It was a problem.
And how about health conditions? I mean, did you or anybody in your family or extended family that was there get very sick at any point?
Yes, we did have some health problems. We were, I'd say, essentially a healthy family, but we had problems like with dysentery. Amoebic dysentery was one of the things that I managed to get, and I believe my brother had it. So I was hospitalized for a short time, and that's very inconvenient when you have bathrooms that are shared by many, many people, and you're lined up and you have a limited amount of TP. So, with amoebic dysentery, it's a very uncomfortable situation. And then my mother was very ill at one time and was taken out of the camp. I was in the hospital at the time this happened, when she came in, and it was terribly painful for me to see her in such pain. She was finally taken out because they realized she needed surgery. She had a bowel obstruction, but it wasn't obvious at the time, and she almost died. And because it ruptured and she developed peritonitis, and we had very little to treat that with. The doctor, I believe, gave her one dose had some sulfa, but not enough to really keep it going. So she was out in the she was outside in the hospital for a month or 6 weeks, and somehow did pull through.
Now, did you ever get passes, any of you, to get out for any other reason other than your mother's hospitalization?
Okay, the only time I did get out was for my mother's hospitalization, and it was just a short visit. Not, I don't believe it was more than once a week, or there were very few passes, put out. They were very strict about that. However, in reading books and talking to people, there were some that seemed to be able to be out a lot more, and some that lived outside, or for some reason or another, with part of the family there, I think for health reasons. But
did your whole extended family try to kind of stay near each other and stay in touch? You said the aunt, the cousin, and all that. Did you have a camp there? Did you all try to kind of be together there?
I would say yes, we had a pretty close family unit. We always did, we saw each other at least, for a meal or two a day. My uncle was able to have a sort of a little shanty area. We never had one, ourselves, our family. Some of us girls had a little shanty that we shared. One of the things I should bring out is that the first, just about a year after we'd been there, Japanese issued an order, or issued a decree that they knew there were military men in the camp. They had a list of military men, and they were to report to the main office. And they issued this in the morning, one morning. My mother and father, of course, discussed this, wondering if they had my father's name, and they obviously, let us know that if they did not report, they would be executed. And they thought it best that he turn himself in. It was a matter of 3 or 4 hours, and he was on a truck and taken out to, we didn't know where. They don't tell you these things. But it was a pretty devastating experience, and it was almost like just a chance to wave goodbye. You know, there were hardly chance to, I mean, they had to quickly gather up what they thought he was able to take. And there was a truckload taken out. I don't remember the number. And we did find out later he was taken to Fort Santiago, the old walled prison, interrogated. We never heard all the details. And, of course, he was never able to let us know. And I don't know that he wanted us to know. But it was a 6-week period there, I believe, and not a good experience. And from there, he went to Cabanatuan. At that point, we did have some communication that was the official communication we could receive, very strict censorship with some notes. However, a little later, we were able to get underground notes passed. And I thought I had some of those. I'm going to have to check because I thought I had been able to keep some of those. So there was some underground communication. And
What happened after the 6 weeks?
well, this was 6 weeks after he was in the Fort Santiago, and then in this dungeon situation. This was the old walled city where the Japanese had, and I know that the interrogation was probably very severe, and probably some physical things went on. And somebody had told us later he was not in very good shape when he got into Cabanatuan. He was in his early 40s, but that he did get back, recover, and was able to get back into fairly good health, I think, afterwards. In fact, he was concerned about us and was able to send some milk, canned milk or powdered milk probably, into our camp for my sister. He was worried about our food conditions, which weren't, they were getting bad, but they weren't at that point so crucial.
Now, was he ever allowed to return to the camp?
No, we never saw him again. We did not have communication until later, after the war. Well, we did hear that he was taken to Bilibid, and that's where we thought he was when the war ended. We found out later he was put on a prison ship. He actually, all this information came after the war from somebody that had shared the experience, and he was placed on a prison ship. He was on 3 ships, ended up on the Orinoco Maru, which there's a story about that. So, and about 3 days before he might have landed in Japan, and this was, of course, to go to the mines and work the mines of Japan, but he died.
So there you were, your mother and your whole family. Yeah, so that's very hard. And your sister and your brother and your mother, I mean, how long after that was it before you actually, the liberation came?
Until the
Liberation.
the liberation. Well, as I say, we didn't know any of this until any of this information on my father. The actual date, we get these dates, and I think they're pretty accurate. He was put on a prison ship, I think about December 13th of 44, and would have been in Japan about 23rd or so of January. And so had the liberation been just a couple of months earlier, he would have been in Bilibid. And that's really where we thought he was when the war ended. We thought that we would be seeing him.
So at that point, this was the kind of third year you'd been at the camp. I mean, were the food conditions, do you remember being hungry all the time? What did you do about your little sister?
Well, of course, food was the big topic. This was a thing we thought about, I would say, the last 6-8 months, last year primarily, of the internment camp. It was interesting because, and we've shared this with, or noticed in other similar situations, I was taking typing lessons along with a few other things in camp. And for practice, we decided writing recipes would be just great. But it wasn't only people that were doing typing lessons. It was, my brother said he typed. No, he knew how to type. He'd learned how to type earlier. He typed recipes. We typed recipes, and we would talk about food. We were always, food was never that good. We had a few, yes, we had a few good meals earlier, and maybe we had enough for the first year primarily, but not anything like we would have eaten. But the last year, gradually, it was very poor quality, very little protein, not a balanced diet, and towards the end, many of us developed beriberi. I had beriberi. We were so, well, you're always hungry, but I don't remember just having hunger pangs. It was just a case of this gnawing feeling of never being full. But the thing is, we ran out of energy. They closed schools the last few months because we couldn't climb up to the floors to get there. You know, no one had the energy to teach or go to school. And just walking 15, 20 feet, I remember, was a chore. It was hard. So it was, you know, it was just a case, it was just a matter of time, I think, if MacArthur and the troops hadn't come in, that we would have probably all been done in.
Do you remember the day that you found out liberation was coming? What was that for you?
We, you know, had an indication that, well, it was at Christmas. We had, or when was it? We had the plane flew over and dropped these leaflets and said, "Christmas will be here." Was in, what was it? I should remember that that note because it's such a well-known one. But we knew it was at 3 days or something like this. And it was, of course, this was in February at the time, or late January. So we knew, and before that, starting about October, before our liberation, we would have air raids. We knew that Americans had come back, were in the area, and we weren't allowed to be outside, but we'd have sirens. And Japanese made it very clear that we were not to watch, not to look at these planes, but we would crouch to the windows and we would try to see as much as we could. And it was just fascinating. It was, and of course, exhilarating because we could see these B-29s coming over, dropping bombs, and occasionally being shot at. I mean, which would be awful to see a plane shattered or, you know that they just hadn't made it. But anyway, the liberation, bombings, everything was building up to a climax. We knew something was going to be happening. And on the evening of the 3rd, it was just, I think we were crouched. We knew several of us were up all night and listening to the shelling and or action that was taking place. There was nothing right around us, but we were just crouched and knew that something was taking place. And when these tanks finally did come in early, well, it was at night, because it was, I don't know just what time it was, towards probably after 12, 1 o'clock. I'd have to check my diary again, but it was just amazing. We couldn't believe it. And these tanks came in through the gate. And of course, there was a lot of action because the Japanese were there, but they weren't prepared, so they came in, and it was just, we stayed in the buildings. They didn't want anyone scattering around. I think a few, maybe at the front, went out to meet some of the soldiers, but it was an unbelievable feeling. I don't believe I've ever experienced anything quite so exhilarating and almost unbelievable.
How many days was it before you knew you were free and could actually go somewhere away from the camp?
I don't think we thought about that. I didn't think about, yes, we were free because they'd come in, but we knew we had to stay secure because they were still fighting and shelling was going on. And it wasn't too long after that they started shelling our camp. And we had some fatalities, which was pretty sad. I did get out one day. We were able to find a couple of GIs to take us out in a Jeep. I wanted to get out to our house. My brother had been out a little earlier, and several of us went out, and I went out. I don't think, it was just a case of seeing my house again. But it could have been a dangerous mission because there were snipers. And one of the situations that I remember very clearly was I have a friend who was still wearing, she's no longer living, had a pair of tennis shoes. I had no shoes at that point. I had just buckles. And I knew we might have to get out and go through some rough terrain. And I asked if I could borrow the tennis shoes. And she was very agreeable. So I borrowed them. When I came back, of course, returned them because these were still very prized possessions. Her mother found out about it and just said, how could you possibly have taken my daughter's shoes, the only pair of shoes she owns? And so I've never forgot that. I felt very guilty. I thought, oh, if I hadn't gotten back and her shoes had been lost. So
What was it like when you saw your house?
it was just great. I just thought, but it was empty, primarily empty. The Japanese had taken it over and gotten rid of, we heard that they'd taken all the furniture out. We had some gorgeous Victorian furniture, some nice furniture, other, just basic pieces, and they had built a big bonfire. They left a piano. There was a baby grand piano. They left that. And there were some other things. I have a chest that did get back. We lost most of our things, but this Gabino had taken some things and I think put them away. So we have some things that were saved.
Did you find Gabino after the war?
Yes. In fact, we were in contact and we tried to take care of all his trouble. We were pretty generous with him. Yes, he was still around. Yeah, he was very faithful.
When your mother knew you were going to try to go see her, did she know and did she tell you, well, go in the backyard and see if you can get something? Or?
I'm not sure I told her. I don't know that she would have wanted me to go.
And what about your brother? Did he go a few days earlier?
He went a few days earlier, and he being older, he went out. It was interesting. We had a friend of the family's. He'd been, my brother had known him through scouts. He was older than my brother. He was back here going to school and college, joined the services when the war broke out. And his father was out in Manila working. He and his mother and the two brothers had come back to the States. He was anxious to get back out to the Philippines. He was concerned about his father. And he was in our camp about 2 or 3 days after we were released, looked us up. And then he said he was going to try to get up to Los Baños, where his father was. But he did go out. He went out with my brother. And they dug up this oil, some gasoline that was buried, and which was very helpful. They were low on gasoline. And so they had this gasoline. They also found some of the jewelry, I believe. And they checked the rafters, the area for the sterling and the Scotch. They aren't sure. They think maybe the mice. We don't know. Mice had chewed the rope, so we don't know.
And just tell me, so now when did you actually, just hear a little rattle there.
Is it?
So, yeah, it's rattling. So just tell me, I'm not shooting that way, so just tell me actually among your friends that were there that you ever did, what we remember, and what we had some great times. When my husband hears about some of these stories, and we're talking about camp, he said, well, it sounds like you were on a 3-year picnic. And we were at the best age. We were optimistic. We knew we'd get through this. We always felt positive. 4 of us gals had this little shanty. You may have heard this from Margie. That we bought. We bought this this base. It had a platform and a roof, and it was just a very small, like something like 8 by 8, 6 by 6. It had no siding, and we bought this from some boys that didn't think they were going to be able to use it for 20 pesos, and we built this sort of form. We each had our own space. We built this, somehow got Sawali and built the sides. This was
first year, I think, late in the first year. And it was our little clubhouse. And you may hear this because I wrote a theme about it, and this is why it just sticks in my mind so clearly. But we had to celebrate when we got this finished, I think. And occasionally, at this point, you could still get scraps, like was able to get some pineapple peelings that were going to be thrown out. And so I got that, and somehow we got some sugar. It was still available. It became very scarce later. So I put the sugar and the pineapple together, and after a short while with a little water, it ferments, and we had some Kickapoo joy juice. And I guess some of this was made otherwise, too. And you know, it was, we were daring. We had this, and, you know, it was innocent, really, but no, and we had, to keep busy, I think several of us got shirts, had some white shirts that we got signatures, autographs, names, and sewed these names. I have this shirt, and it has all my friends' names, and it took me forever because the weave was so tight in my shirt, I could hardly get the needle through. But anyway, I did accomplish it. We had autograph books that we made. I've still got that. We had a wonderful Sunday school group. This woman, this lovely lady that was on her way to India and was caught. We had this, we were from different denominations, but we had this group, and she was just a wonderful person. And we had more fun. We had regular meetings, and we would learn, memorize different passages. We would do like the Beatitudes and unison. So, you know, it was busy. It was just, we had plays. We had lots of fun in many ways.
Do you remember babies being born?
I remember that the Japanese did not want to have any children. People have children in the camp. They didn't need any more people, I suppose, and it made sense. And there were some being born, and I remember the fathers being put in jail because they were not supposed to be having children. But there were several born, yes.
And how about when the liberation came, how many days did it take you, to weeks or months, to get out of the camp and then back? And how did you finally get to the United States?
We were liberated on the 3rd, as everyone knows. The Army nurses were the first to be taken out. And I think there was a lottery. Somehow I believe, were on understood was the first group, which was the 23rd of February, pretty early. I would like to have stayed a little longer. There was a limey friend, a fellow that I had met in camp, and I have all these letters passed back and forth. He was taken out with an group of 800 to go to Los Baños to form the camp. And so we had many letters, and I really would like to have seen him before we went back. But no, we left on the 23rd, flew out on a C-47 to Leyte, Tacloban, and then came back on the Liberty ship. And we had while the ship was sitting out in the bay, several of us decided, I had met somebody on the beach, 11th Airborne fellow. I thought, it'd be nice to see him again. We were taken to this hospital and sort of deloused, and I don't think that was a problem, but as much, no, but just they wanted to check us out. And then we were taken out on this ship, and we didn't know when we were going to sail. They wouldn't tell us because it was security. They didn't know for sure themselves. Anyway, we saw an LST going by, and we called down and waved and said, do you mind taking us back to the beach, to the area? Oh, yes, they would be happy to. So I think there were 5 or 6 of us. We climbed down this rope ladder into this LST, and off we went. But they didn't take us to the beach. They were Seabees, and they took us to where they had their little area. And they were just such gentlemen, great guys. They fed us lunch, played music. We got their names, addresses, and said we'd write their mothers. And somehow we got some ice cream. Was that from them or someone else? But it was a great day. And when I went down this rope ladder, my brother was up on the deck. I said, tell Mom we'll be back a little later. The ship could have gone off and left us, if they had to get out, because they were still in enemy territory. The Navy, it was a zigzagging trip coming back.
And how did you know where you were going to go after
Oh.
How did you decide
Oh.
you were coming back to the U.S.?
Well, we knew we had no place to go. My father wasn't available. No, it was just, I guess there was no question we were going to come back to the States. We went back to my grandmother's, my mother's parents' place in Colorado, Glenwood on the western slope, Glenwood Springs. I was ready for college. My brother was more than ready. I actually had a year beyond high school. I had graduated in high school, had an extra year there. My brother was ready to go to school, so we, shortly after that, started our education and then carried on with our lives.
What was it like when you first got back to the States? Did people know what you'd been through? Did they ask you questions? Did you tell them what had happened to you?
Oh, no.
Just say it in a whole sentence.
Oh, I'm sorry. When we came back, we came into the San Francisco Bay Area, and I came in a WAC uniform because we had to have something to wear. It was cool. It was March. It was quite very cold in San Francisco. We did get some shopping coupons that we could use to go shopping, so we did get some clothes. And we were in the Bay Area for several days and then came back by train, of course, to Colorado. Well, our immediate relatives were very interested. Actually, when you asked if people were interested, I do remember, yes, somebody at the local paper wanted to have a story. And my mother asked me to write it. So somehow I got this horrible sore throat. I think I had a strep throat. But they wanted to get this out. And I remember sitting up, feeling awful, and writing this story. And as I read it, I don't know. Today it was very accurate because it was all fresh in my mind. But I think I would edit it a little bit at this point. But that came out in the paper, and I saw this recently. Another aunt had sent it to me.
And what did you do for your university? Where did you decide to go to school?
I wrote to 3 schools. I really would like to have gone to a school in New York, Cornell or Syracuse. Syracuse because 11th Airborne friend back in Tacloban was going there before he went into the paratroopers. I applied for a scholarship. We felt that really we needed some help. We didn't know where money was coming from exactly. We didn't know anything. We didn't know the situation with my father. I received a full scholarship from the University of Colorado, which I accepted. My brother had planned to go to MIT, and he did go back there. He supplemented his education with library work, and so.
So, as we just have very little time, but
Okay.
I just wondered if you could but tell me, so did you ever, other than the reunions, were you ever in touch? Who did you marry? Was it anybody relating to the Philippines or anything?
When I came back, of course, and I started school in June, started in summer school, following my internment. I felt really out of place. I didn't, and I thought, people here just don't realize what was going on out there. There were very few fellas. There were 3 gals to every fellow up at University of Colorado. But I made some friends, and met actually my husband in I believe my sophomore year. But we weren't serious until later. He graduated 2 years before I did. I reconnected with my English friend who was studying medicine. He'd decided to become a doctor, and we had quite a few letters. I sometimes felt that maybe had we not been so far apart, he went back to England. He worked on the Queen Mary in the summers, and he called, I know, a couple times when he was in between school. And if we had been able to get together, possibly something would have worked out. But it just wasn't to happen.
This has been wonderful. It's just lovely. Do you remember VE Day or VJ Day? Did they stand out in your mind?
No.
VE Day or VJ Day?
Oh, yes. VJ Day. I'm confused, too, on the dates, but VJ Day was, I believe, in June. Was it in June? I was up at school. And felt very elated because we thought, yes, finally, we'll be, my father will be getting back because he'll be sent back from Japan. And so it was probably a few weeks later that we had a letter from somebody that had been closely associated with him, telling us that the situation. And the liberation, the European War, that was, I mean, it was great. It was just it was another exhilarating experience to think that, yes, finally this is over. So, I don't know.
Great, excellent. No,
Really?
is there any,
And I don't want to continue
No,
this
no, no.
because, well, this group of ours, our teenage group, were so close, and when we came back, we wanted to know where are you going and what are you going to be doing? And we immediately had addresses. I wrote letters. I can't believe I did save these letters that I wrote for the first year, some of them a little longer. We were writing, Margie and I wrote at least every week, every 2 weeks, several others very often. I've got letters from people, I hardly remember some of the people, but I have this box of numerous letters. But this was the big thing, was writing to our friends and keeping up with them. And yes, we were going to have a reunion in, was it the first year? Well, this didn't happen. We didn't have it the first 10 years. None of us could get away. So it was much later when we finally, but we got together, but we did keep in touch. And because I've kept in touch with several of these people, it's been very rewarding. Some of my closest friends.
Wonderful.